May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord. The gospel reading that you just heard has been something that the church has held onto almost from the very inception. It is verses that seem to substantiate and legitimize excommunication. What is excommunication? Excommunication is where a member of the congregation is told that they are now outside of the congregation, where they are not able anymore to receive communion. And so they are outside of communion. They are excommunion, excommunicated. This has been used by the church, the Catholic Church, I would say, for centuries now. And they get that legitimization from these verses. Jesus begins by talking about the church. His little group of followers he calls church. And even there, where you have only 12, there can be disputes, you see. When one sins against you, he says, go to them and talk to them so that you might resolve the issue. If the person doesn't want to listen to you, then bring one or two others with you so that they can hear every word that's being spoken. If it still doesn't do anything to resolve the issue, then bring it to the whole congregation. Let the congregation decide. And if it still doesn't change the individual, then he says, treat them as a Gentile or a tax collector. It's seemingly harsh words. Because what is a Gentile? In Jesus' day, the Jews divided the world into two parts. Them, Jews, everyone else, Gentiles. So you and I are Gentiles. The Jews felt that they were special people. They had been chosen by God. And they followed God's law by having certain rituals as to how they ate, what kind of food they had, what kind of utensils they used. They followed the law on the Sabbath, where they didn't do any work. And that's one reason why Jews were never conscripted into the Roman army. You know, whenever the Romans attacked some place and dominated it, many of the men would be forced to join the Roman army. But it was not so in the case of the Jews, because the Jew absolutely refused to work on the Sabbath. Now, if you have a soldier who is not going to fight, which is work, on the Sabbath, the enemy knows what to do. They're just going to wait till the 7th day of the week, till Saturday, and they're going to attack and run over everybody. And so the Jew was never conscripted into the army. They also felt that they had a special relationship with God, which was visible through every male circumcision, which goes back to the time of Abraham. This was a sign of the covenant that God made with Abraham and with his descendants. The Gentiles were outside of that, you see. They didn't want anything to do with Gentiles. They didn't want to eat with them because they ate foods that the Jews would never eat. They were ritually unclean. And so the Gentiles were not desirable. In many ways, they were hated and despised. Tax collectors, on the other hand, were a different story. Tax collectors were Jews, but they worked for the Romans. They were seen as traitors. They collected money from their fellow Jews to give to the despised Romans, these Gentiles. And in the meantime, each tax collector filled his pockets with as much money as he could glean from his neighbors. They would despise people. Nobody wanted anything to do with the tax collector. You think it's bad today? Go back to Jesus' time. So we have here a situation when this gospel is read with that in mind, you see. Treat them as a Gentile or a tax collector. You're saying to people, have nothing to do with them. But we have to look at the whole story. We just can't take this in isolation. Jesus himself, you see, related to Gentiles. He related to tax collectors. Jesus was never criticized for condemning Gentiles or tax collectors. In fact, he healed the daughters of two Gentiles, one being a Roman centurion, and he said to him, "In all of Israel I have not found a faith as strong as yours." And then a couple of weeks ago we read the story of the Canaanite woman who came to him begging that he heal her daughter. And again he said to her, "Great is your faith, woman. Be it done to you as you wish." And so he had no problems with Gentiles. He had no problems with tax collectors. Matthew, one of his disciples, was a tax collector. He was accused, you see, of being too nice to Gentiles, to tax collectors, to what the normal Jew would call a sinner, one who did not follow the law. He ate with them. He drank with them. He associated with them. So this passage then cannot be interpreted as throwing someone to the dogs, so to speak, by treating them as a Gentile and a tax collector. That's not what Jesus did with these people. It's also not something that the church over the years has agreed with. In a few minutes, we will confess our faith by reciting the Nicene Creed. And in the third article of the Creed, we say, we believe in one baptism for the forgiveness of sins. We are baptized. And when we are baptized, it's as if a garment is put over us. A garment of grace by God. A garment of forgiveness. And this stays on us our whole life long. And any sin that we commit after our baptism is all inside this garment of grace, of forgiveness. God never sees and responds to the sin. It's forgiven. The church has called this habitual grace. The word habitual comes from the word habit, which nuns used to wear. You remember the black, long cloaks and garments that the nuns wore. It covers us entirely, forever. We can deny it. We can walk around as if we don't believe it, but it's still there. God has put it on us. And so he doesn't treat us as an outsider, regardless of what we do. We are dear to him. We're near to him. And for the church then to turn around and say to some, well, you're excommunicated, doesn't make any sense. It didn't to Jesus, and it doesn't in the creed. If we would look at this passage and look at what comes right before it and what comes after it, it makes it even clearer. Because right before it is the parable of the lost sheep. You know that story. A shepherd has 100 sheep. And Jesus says, he notices that one of them is missing. And so he leaves the 99 and he goes searching for that one sheep, to bring that sheep back to the flock, back to the congregation, if you will. He searches and searches and